In 1943, Britain's allotments produced over 1 million tons of vegetables. No polytunnels, no automatic irrigation, no YouTube tutorials. Just knowledge passed from one generation to the next on a handshake and a cup of tea. By 2020, most of that knowledge had vanished. Not because it stopped working. It worked brilliantly, but because supermarkets made us forget we ever needed it. I've spent the last 8 months collecting these techniques from retired allotment holders across the UK, from a 91-year-old woman in Dundee to a former coal miner in Pontefract who still grows enough veggie to feed 3 families. 25 methods. All tested. All forgotten. All capable of doubling what your plot produces while cutting your effort in half. Everything your grandfather knew about soil started with one principle that modern gardening has almost completely abandoned. You feed the ground, not the plant. Before weed-suppressing membrane existed, allotment holders laid down thick layers of dampened newspaper between their rows, 6 to 8 sheets, overlapping, covered with a thin layer of grass clippings. It suppresses weeds for an entire season, breaks down into the soil by autumn, and costs absolutely nothing. A retired teacher in Swansea showed me her plot last April. Not a single weed between her bean rows, and she hadn't touched them since March. The newspaper feeds the worms as it decomposes, and those worms do your digging for you. Now here's one that makes people uncomfortable, but the science is settled. Human urine diluted at roughly 1 part to 10 parts water delivers nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in almost exactly the ratio most brassicas need. A 2019 study from the University of Kuopio in Finland confirmed that crops fertilized with diluted urine produced yields comparable to those given commercial fertilizer. Allotment holders in Sheffield were doing this in the 1940s. They called it liquid gold and kept a bucket behind the shed. Free, effective, and available every single day. If you've got a patch of comfrey growing on your plot, and if you haven't, plant some immediately, you're sitting on the most powerful free fertilizer in Britain. Cut the leaves, stuff them into a bucket, weigh them down. With a brick, add water, and leave it for 3 weeks. The resulting liquid is rich in potassium and is particularly brilliant for tomatoes, peppers, and fruit bushes. A gentleman in his late 70s on a Leeds allotment told me he hasn't bought tomato feed in over 40 years. His yields, consistently above 12 kilograms per plant. Comfrey's root system also mines minerals from deep underground that shallow-rooted crops can't reach, then deposits them on the surface when the leaves decompose. Forget the compost bin. The fastest way to build extraordinary soil is to dig a trench 1 spade deep, fill it with kitchen scraps, cardboard, and garden waste, then cover it back over. Plant beans or courgettes directly on top 3 months later. The roots feed on the decomposing material below, while the surface stays clean and workable. Allotment committees in Manchester used to allocate trench rows across plots in the 1950s. Each row would be trenched 1 winter, planted the next summer, and by the 3rd year, the soil was so fertile you could grow virtually anything in it. Every autumn, British streets are carpeted with free soil conditioner, and almost nobody collects it. Fallen leaves, packed into black bin bags with a few holes punched in, left for 12 months, produce leaf mold, a material so valuable that commercial growers pay over $8 per bag for it. It holds up to 500 times its weight in water. A woman on an allotment in Harrogate collects 60 bags every November from the pavement outside her house. Her plot hasn't needed watering during a dry spell in over a decade. Charles Dowding popularized the no-dig method, but allotment holders in Somerset were practicing it decades before he wrote about it. Stop turning your soil. Layer compost, manure, and organic matter on top each year. The soil structure builds itself. Worm populations explode. Fungal networks stay intact. A 2021 trial at Coventry University's Centre for Agroecology compared no-dig plots with traditionally dug plots over 3 years. The no-dig plots produced 11% higher yields by year 3 and required roughly 60% less labour. If you've got a wood burner or a fire pit, you're throwing away potassium every time you empty the ash. Hardwood ash, sprinkled lightly around brassicas and root vegetables, raises soil pH and delivers potassium directly to the root zone. Too much will damage your soil. A thin dusting per season is enough. Allotment holders in Northumberland used to save their fireplace ash all winter in a metal bin by the back door. Then spread it across the plot in February, before the growing season started. 1 handful per square meter. That's it. A retired postman in Wolverhampton grows more tomatoes on his 12-rod plot than most polytunnels in Cornwall manage, and his method has nothing to do with the variety he plants. It's about when, where, and how closely. The single biggest mistake British growers make is sowing everything at once in April. You end up with 200 letters in June and nothing in September. Instead, sow a short row every 2 weeks from March through August. A pinch of lettuce seed, a dozen radish seeds, a handful of spinach. You'll harvest continuously for 6 months instead of having one overwhelming glut followed by bare soil. This next one isn't just a Native American technique. British allotment holders adapted it in the 1970s. Plant sweet corn, climbing beans, and squash together. The corn provides a structure for the beans to climb. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil that feeds the corn. The squash leaves shade the ground, suppressing weeds and retaining moisture. 3 crops in the space of 1, each helping the other. A family in Bristol grew enough from a single 3 sisters bed last summer to produce meals for 11 weeks running. When plot space is tight, grow potatoes vertically. Old compost bags, rubble sacks, even thick bin liners with drainage holes punched in the bottom. Start with 6 inches of compost and a seed potato. As the foliage grows, keep adding compost until the bag is full. 1 bag produces roughly 2 kilograms of potatoes in the footprint of a dinner plate. A pensioner in Rotherham runs 40 bags along the edge of his plot and harvests over 80 kilograms a year from space that would otherwise grow weeds along the fence. Before planting seed potatoes, stand them upright in egg boxes on a cool, bright windowsill for 4 to 6 weeks. The eyes sprout short, stubby green shoots. When planted, these pre-sprouted potatoes establish faster, crop earlier, and often produce 15 to 20% higher yields than unchitted ones. Research from the James Hutton Institute in Scotland found that chitting was particularly effective for early varieties planted in cooler northern soils, where the growing season is already shorter. Marigolds between tomato rows aren't just decorative. Their scent repels whitefly, and their roots release compounds that suppress nematodes in the soil. Nasturtiums planted near brassicas act as sacrificial crops. Blackfly attack the nasturtiums instead of your cabbages. A retired nurse in Edinburgh interplants every single row on her allotment. She hasn't used pesticide in 9 years, and her produce regularly wins at the local horticultural show. Lay thick cardboard along your paths and between beds, then cover with wood chips or bark. The cardboard kills weeds beneath, feeds the soil as it breaks down, and creates a surface you can walk on, even in wet weather, without compacting the growing beds. Allotment holders in Tyneside have been doing this since at least the 1960s, using flattened boxes from the local markets. 1 roll of free cardboard replaces hours of path weeding every month. Most seed packets tell you to space plants far apart for machine cultivation. On an allotment, you're not using machines. By planting in deep, well-composted beds and reducing spacing by 1/3, you can grow significantly more in the same area. The closely planted leaves shade out weeds and reduce water evaporation. A trial plot in a community garden in Coventry increased carrot yield by 28%, simply by narrowing the spacing from 15 centimeters to 10 in deeply composted raised beds. I want to stop here for a moment. I've been collecting these techniques for months, speaking to allotment holders who are in their 70s, 80s, even 90s. And something struck me during those conversations that I didn't expect. These people aren't just sharing gardening tips. They're trying to pass something on before it disappears completely. A woman in Dundee, 91 years old, still walking to her plot 3 days a week, grabbed my arm and said, "Nobody asks me these things anymore. Write it down." Please write it down. So that's what this is. It's not just about growing more courgettes. It's about preserving a body of practical knowledge that took generations to build and could vanish in one. The chemicals aisle at your local garden center didn't exist before 1965, which raises an obvious question. How did allotment holders deal with slugs, aphids, And cabbage white butterflies for the century before that? Sink a jar or yogurt pot into the soil so the rim is level with the surface. Fill it halfway with cheap beer. Slugs are attracted to the yeast, crawl in, and drown. Cruel perhaps, but effective and entirely chemical-free. Replace the beer every few days. An allotment holder in Gloucester runs 12 traps across his brassica beds and empties them every Wednesday. His slug damage dropped by what he estimates is over 70% in the first season. Rather than spraying for cabbage whites, drape horticultural fleece over brassica beds from April to September. The butterflies simply cannot reach the leaves to lay eggs. Rotate the fleece between beds each season so it doesn't deteriorate in one spot. A family in Norwich has used the same 3 pieces of fleece for 7 years, washing them each autumn. Crush 4 bulbs of garlic into a liter of boiling water. Let it steep overnight, strain it, dilute it at 1 part to 10, and spray it onto aphid-prone plants. The allicin in garlic disrupts the feeding behavior of soft-bodied insects. Not a permanent solution, but effective enough between applications. Allotment holders in the valleys were using this long before organic gardening had a name. Wind is the invisible crop killer on British allotments. A 40% permeable windbreak, woven netting, or even a row of Jerusalem artichokes planted along the prevailing wind side reduces wind speed for a distance of roughly 10 times its height. That means a 2-meter screen protects 20 meters of plot. Crops grow faster, pollination improves, and water evaporation from the soil drops dramatically. A retired engineer in Aberystwyth measured the difference on his own plot and found his exposed beds produced 35% less than his sheltered ones in the same season. Wrap copper tape around the rims of raised beds and large pots. Slugs and snails receive a mild galvanic reaction when their slime contacts the copper, and they turn away. 1 roll costs around $4 and lasts several seasons. A gardener in Plymouth who grows primarily in raised beds hasn't found a single slug inside them in 3 years. Before anyone sold mini greenhouses for 89 pounds, allotment holders built cold frames from old sash windows balanced on a rectangle of bricks. The principle is identical. Trapped solar heat extends your growing season by 6 to 8 weeks on each end. Start seedlings in February, harden off transplants in March, grow winter salads through December. A joiner in Bolton builds them from skip vines and donates them to new plot holders. He's made over 40. Most British gardeners lose between 30 and 40% of what they grow. Not to pests, not the weather. To harvest at the wrong moment, or storing produce in exactly the wrong place. Don't pull carrots and parsnips by the foliage. Grip the root at the crown and twist gently upward. Pulling snaps the taproot and leaves the bottom third in the ground. The twist method extracts the full root intact. Sounds trivial, but over a full season, it can mean the difference between 8 kilograms of carrots and 12. A market gardener in Lincolnshire taught me this. He said he sees people yanking carrots every time he walks past the allotments, and it makes him wince. Fill a wooden crate or sturdy cardboard box with slightly damp sand. Layer unwashed carrots, parsnips, and beetroot in the sand, ensuring none of them touch each other. Store in a cool, dark, frost-free place. A garage, an unheated spare room, or a brick outhouse. Stored this way, root vegetables last 4 to 5 months without refrigeration. This was standard practice in every British household before fridges became common. A couple in their 80s in rural Shropshire still store their entire autumn harvest this way and eat homegrown root veg right through to March. At the end of September, when the last tomatoes refuse to ripen on the vine, pick them green and place them in a paper bag with a ripe banana. The ethylene gas from the banana triggers ripening within 5 to 10 days. Every allotment holder over 70 seems to know this. Everyone under 40 seems astonished by it. A grandmother in Wakefield ripened over 9 kilograms of green tomatoes last October using nothing but 3 bananas and a collection of brown paper bags from her local bakery. Lettuces, spinach, chard, kale, and many oriental greens don't need to be pulled whole. Harvest only the outer leaves, leaving the central growing point intact. The plant regenerates and produces a second, third, sometimes fourth harvest from the same root. One row of cut and come again lettuce, sown in April, can provide salad leaves until November if managed properly. A woman on an allotment in Exeter calculated she saved over $140 in salad purchases last year from a single 3-meter row. And finally, tie small bunches of herbs, sage, thyme, rosemary, mint, oregano, and hang them upside down in a warm, dry, airy spot for 2 weeks. Once completely dry, strip the leaves and store them in glass jars. Home-dried herbs are vastly more flavorful than the jars you buy in supermarkets, which may have been sitting in warehouses for over a year before reaching the shelf. The 2023 Witch. Report on dried herbs found that 3 out of 5 supermarket brands contained measurable levels of bulking agents or undeclared plant material. Drying your own avoids that entirely. A herb grower in the Cotswolds dries enough each summer to supply her kitchen, her neighbors, and her local church fete stall. 25 hacks might sound like a lot to remember, but here's the truth. Your great-grandparents didn't think of these as hacks at all. They were just how things were done. Common sense passed along at the allotment gate, over garden fences, in potting sheds, while the kettle boiled on a camping stove. Somewhere in the last 50 years, we traded that knowledge for convenience. We swapped the comfrey bucket for a plastic bottle of Miracle Grow. We replaced the newspaper mulch with rolls of landscape fabric shipped from China. None of that made us better growers. It just made us more dependent on things we have to pay for. The beautiful thing about every single technique in this video is that it costs almost nothing. Newspaper, cardboard, comfrey leaves, fallen leaves, wood ash, a jar of beer, a bulb of garlic. These aren't products. They're resources that already exist around you, waiting to be used. And they work. They worked in 1943 when this country fed itself from back gardens and allotments. And they work now. If you've got a plot, try 3 of these this season. Just 3. See what happens. And if you don't have a plot, if you're on one of those 18-month waiting lists that councils keep extending, start with a few bags of potatoes on your patio and a window box of cut and come again lettuce. The principles are the same wherever you grow. I've got a follow-up video in production right now covering forgotten preservation methods. The techniques that let wartime families store a full year's harvest without a single freezer. If you want to see that when it drops, subscribe so it reaches you. And if someone in your life gardens, or wants to start, send them this video. Every one of these techniques deserves to survive another generation. Every share, every comment where you add your own family's growing wisdom keeps this knowledge alive. Don't let it disappear. It's too valuable and too hard won to lose.